Good evening. The Story. Chapter 1. The Gathering Storm. The village hall gleamed under the soft glow of lanterns, each one casting a warm, golden circle across the polished wooden floor. Snow had begun to settle lightly outside, dusting the window-sills and rooftops with delicate white patterns that twinkled under the street lamps. Inside, the festive decorations were in full display. Holly garlands draped over doorways, sprigs of mistletoe tucked into corners, and wreaths with bright red berries hung from the walls. The scent of pine mingled with the faint aroma of freshly baked mince pies, creating a comforting, almost hypnotic warmth that invited every visitor to pause and take in the scene. One by one, the villagers began to arrive, each greeting one another with polite nods or cheerful laughter. Mrs. Penworthy, the owner of the local tea shop, bustled in first. Carrying a tray of delicate pastries and humming a quiet tune, her apron dusted lightly with flour. Behind her followed Mr. Lambert, the town's clockmaker, who straightened his scarf nervously and kept glancing toward the doorway as if expecting someone or something unseen. There was an air of anticipation that seemed to hang just beneath the hall's jovial atmosphere, a tension that one could feel more than hear. Miss Marple, seated near the far window with her knitting basket resting in her lap, observed it all with the calm patience she had cultivated over many years of noticing subtle human behavior. She watched the way Mr. Travers, the club treasurer, adjusted his spectacles for the third time in as many minutes, his gaze flicking nervously between the flower arrangements and the entrance. Something about the careful alignment of the poinsettias and holly sprigs seemed to weigh heavily on him, and she could not help but wonder what worry tugged at his mind so persistently. There was no need for words. Miss Marple knew that in small villages like this, anxiety often revealed itself in the smallest gestures, a twitch of a hand, the tightening of lips, or a restless glance. Nearby, two members of the garden club were engaged in a quiet but heated discussion over the centerpiece for the hall's main table. One insisted that the holly should form a perfect circle around the candles, while the other argued that it would look more natural if slightly asymmetrical. Their voices remained low, but the undercurrent of disagreement hummed like a tensioned string, barely noticeable yet unmistakably present to someone who cared to watch. Miss Marple's sharp eyes caught the fleeting expressions of frustration and quiet determination that crossed their faces, noting the tiny hints of rivalry that even the most casual visitor might overlook. Amid this carefully choreographed bustle, whispers began to ripple through the hall like soft breezes. A latecomer was expected, though no one seemed entirely sure who it might be. The notion of an unknown visitor sparked curiosity and a subtle unease, weaving through the friendly greetings and polite laughter. Miss Marple tilted her head slightly, sensing the nervous energy in the room and marking it quietly in her mind. There was something in the air, she thought, something small yet significant that had yet to reveal itself fully. As more villagers arrived, the hall grew warmer, louder, and simultaneously more tense. The scent of pine mingled with faint traces of candle wax, and the chatter shifted from light-hearted anecdotes to hushed speculation. Every glance, every small gesture seemed charged with meaning. The latecomer's impending arrival was like a question mark suspended above the hall, and Miss Marple could feel the subtle tightening of anticipation like the first notes of a song about to unfold. For now, the villagers moved among the decorations, arranging, chatting, and wondering, unaware that this evening's gathering might hold more than seasonal cheer. It might hold secrets waiting to be uncovered. Quietly, in plain sight, the hall had reached a gentle hum of conversation when Mr. Travers, standing near the polished oak table, raised his glass for a toast. The room quieted, the clinking of porcelain mugs and the soft rustle of coats fading into an expectant hush. "To another joyful Christmas gathering," he announced, voice carefully cheerful. "And to the hard work of our garden club, which has brought such beauty to our village once again." Heads nodded, glasses lifted, and for a moment the room seemed wrapped in warmth and contentment. Then a sharp, piercing scream sliced through the cozy atmosphere, shattering the calm like glass. The chatter stopped abruptly. A hush of confusion spread instantly. Miss Marple's knitting fell into her lap as she turned her head toward the sound, her keen eyes scanning the room with quiet precision. Near the holly display, Mr. Lambert had collapsed, his body slumping against the evergreen branches. A few bright red berries tumbled to the floor as he sank down, the very picture of surprise and distress. Gasps and murmurs rose from the gathered villagers. Mrs. Penworthy rushed forward, hands clasped to her mouth, while two younger members knelt beside him, murmuring reassurances. "Is he hurt? What happened?" Voices trembled in a mix of fear and disbelief. The festive warmth of the hall now carried a thin undercurrent of panic, a tension that prickled the skin as surely as the chill outside. Candles flickered, and the soft glow of the lanterns seemed almost to hesitate, as if uncertain whether to continue illuminating this sudden, unsettling scene. Amid the growing commotion, Miss Marple remained composed, her calmness a quiet anchor in the midst of turmoil. She noticed with the clarity of long experience which villagers were genuinely concerned and which seemed to be calculating, observing rather than helping. Mrs. Faraday, for instance, clutched her gloves so tightly that her knuckles whitened, her eyes darting between Mr. Lambert and those around him in a way that suggested more curiosity than sympathy. Meanwhile, Mr. Travers, the treasurer, moved with a careful, measured pace, offering assistance but keeping his expression neutral. Concealing something she could not yet name, small details began to emerge like breadcrumbs on a path. A scuff mark on the polished floor suggested a hurried step. A sleeve smudged with dirt hinted at prior contact with the garden display. Miss Marple's eyes lingered on the faint trace of peppermint that seemed oddly out of place amid the pine and holly. It was subtle, nearly imperceptible, yet her instincts whispered that it might hold significance, something unnoticed by anyone else, but a clue in plain sight. Villagers whispered in low tones, speculating quietly about what could have caused the collapse. Theories floated like drifting snowflakes, a sudden illness, an accident, or perhaps something more deliberate. Miss Marple allowed these murmurs to continue, listening carefully, letting the words settle in her mind. Each reaction, each half-spoken suspicion, was a fragment of a puzzle waiting to be assembled. Even as Mr. Lambert was helped to a chair, supported by concerned friends, the subtle tension lingered. Eyes flickered, nods were exchanged, and some villagers cast furtive glances at one another, their curiosity tinged with unease. This first shock had revealed more than just a physical collapse. It had uncovered hints of hidden motives, rivalries, and the quiet, simmering currents of human nature that often went unnoticed until stirred by an unexpected event. Miss Marple's mind quietly catalogued everything: the anxious adjustments of a sleeve, the sudden intake of breath, the flicker of worry or satisfaction in someone's eyes. She did not rush to conclusions, but she knew that within these small details, the story of the evening's disruption lay waiting. The festive decorations, the cheerful chatter, and the soft candlelight all remained, but beneath the surface, a thread of mystery had been drawn, subtle yet compelling, inviting her and the audience to follow it carefully, step by deliberate step. Chapter 2. Clues in the Christmas Light. The hall had settled into an uneasy calm after the initial shock, though whispers and quiet footsteps still moved like shadows among the festive decorations. Miss Marple rose from her chair, smoothing her cardigan as she began to survey the scene with her customary patience. The holly branches near where Mr. Lambert had fallen were bent and twisted, their bright leaves marked by fingerprints that suggested a struggle, however minor. A chair, once neatly tucked beneath the table, lay toppled at a sharp angle, as if it had been brushed aside in haste. Each detail, small though it seemed, registered fully in her attentive mind. A faint scent lingered in the air, almost imperceptible amid the pine and candle wax, yet unmistakable to those with a careful nose. Peppermint. It was subtle, clinging to the edge of the holly display, and for a moment Miss Marple paused, inhaling thoughtfully. Such a fragrance was out of place here, not something typically carried in the warmth of the hall or by the preparations of the garden club. She filed it away quietly, knowing that scents often told stories as clearly as spoken words, and sometimes even more reliably. Gently, she began to move among the villagers, speaking in soft, unobtrusive tones that invited cooperation without alarm. Mrs. Penworthy, still clutching a tray of untouched pastries, murmured about the sudden collapse, though her account wavered when pressed. Mr. Travers, carefully arranging the toppled chair back into place, spoke with meticulous calm, yet certain details of his story, how he had approached the table, which hands had been occupied, did not entirely match what Miss Marple had observed. The discrepancies were small, almost trivial, yet, in her experience, such subtle gaps often pointed toward deeper truths. As she continued, she noted the reactions of others with quiet attention. A young club member, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment, stumbled over her words, inadvertently revealing that she had been near the display moments before Mr. Lambert fell. An older gentleman, normally so composed, cleared his throat excessively, avoiding eye contact when asked simple questions. Each gesture, each hesitation, layered the scene with nuances that the casual observer would overlook. Yet to Miss Marple, these minor deviations created a map of tension, hinting at hidden motives and concealed truths. The peppermint, the bent holly, the scuffed floor, and the toppled chair, taken individually, they might have seemed inconsequential, but together they formed a subtle pattern. Miss Marple's eyes scanned the room, observing how villagers' positions had shifted since the collapse, noting who had lingered close to the scene and who had moved away, each choice reflecting intent or curiosity or perhaps even guilt. Questions were left unspoken, but in the polite exchanges, she could sense the silent negotiations, the half-concealed anxieties, and the small sparks of intrigue that hinted at something more than an accidental fall. In the quiet of the investigation, she allowed herself the luxury of patience. There was no rush to accusation, no need to disturb the fragile calm of the gathering. Instead, she listened, observed, and catalogued, all the while letting the villagers settle into a rhythm of conversation that, ironically, revealed more than a frantic interrogation ever could. The gentle rustle of coats, the soft clinking of cups, the whispered comments about decorations, all became part of a larger tapestry, each thread a clue if examined carefully. By the time Miss Marple stepped back from the holly display, she had already formed the beginnings of a mental outline of the evening's events. The peppermint's presence, the inconsistencies in the villagers' accounts, the subtle shifts in posture and expression, all pointed to a puzzle waiting to be unravelled. The tension in the hall was no longer immediate panic, but a quiet, lingering curiosity, one that promised that tonight's gathering, though outwardly festive, would unfold into something far more intricate. And in that gentle anticipation, the audience, too, could feel the thrill of small discoveries waiting just beneath the surface. By the time Miss Marple had completed her quiet examination of the scene, more villagers had begun to settle into their places, whispering about what had occurred and sharing fragments of speculation. Amid the gentle clatter of cups and the occasional rustle of coats, a subtle tension had begun to weave itself through the hall. The latecomer, long anticipated, finally appeared at the doorway, a tall figure wrapped in a deep green cloak, snowflakes caught in their hair. Murmurs ran like a soft current through the crowd, for this visitor was not entirely unknown. Whispers of past disputes and old acquaintances travelled quietly from one group to another, and Miss Marple's sharp eyes caught the quick exchange of glances between the newcomer and Mr. Lambert, now seated and still recovering from his collapse. As she observed, Miss Marple recalled what she had heard from others in hushed confidences. The latecomer had once lived in the village many years ago, their connection to Mr. Lambert something the community had only spoken of sparingly. It was an association marked by small rivalries and misunderstandings, and though decades had passed, Miss Marple could see how dormant tensions might quietly resurface in the presence of a festive gathering. The village, she thought, often held grudges like pine needles clinging to winter boots, seemingly insignificant, yet persistent in the smallest of moments. Meanwhile, another layer of subtle intrigue revealed itself in the form of competition. Mrs. Faraday, known for her meticulous attention to floral arrangements, had quietly been striving for the title of Best Decorated Section in the Garden Club's annual display. Her eagerness had been concealed beneath soft smiles and polite conversation, yet it now shimmered faintly beneath her composure. Every carefully placed wreath, every adjustment of holly berries, spoke of ambition that, though harmless on the surface, could create tension in moments of uncertainty. Miss Marple noted the slight tightening of her hands and the quick, almost imperceptible glance at the toppled chair where Mr. Lambert had fallen. Sensing the underlying currents of pride, rivalry, and perhaps worry, Miss Marple moved with quiet deliberation, approaching those she felt might offer insight while speaking in gentle, unassuming tones. Each question was carefully crafted, drawing out the smallest inconsistencies without alarming anyone or creating further tension. A slip of the tongue here, a hesitation there, a fleeting glance exchanged between two villagers, all became pieces of a puzzle she began assembling silently. It was remarkable, she thought, how much could be learned from the things people left unsaid and the subtle movements that accompanied their words. As the evening progressed, the hall remained a tapestry of warmth and unease. Candles flickered in their holders, and the soft scent of pine mingled with the faint trace of peppermint she had noticed earlier. Every detail, from a folded napkin left awkwardly on the table to the unusual placement of a sprig of holly, seemed to carry meaning. Miss Marple's calm presence encouraged others to speak without realizing they were revealing far more than they intended. She listened, observed, and catalogued, allowing the story of connections, ambitions, and hidden resentments to emerge gradually. By the time the tea had been poured again, and murmurs had settled into a quieter rhythm, Miss Marple felt she had gathered enough subtle clues to begin forming her impressions. The latecomers passed, Mrs. Faraday's ambition, and the lingering unease surrounding the collapsed member, all these threads intertwined in her mind, delicate yet deliberate. She did not rush to judgment. Instead, she allowed herself to follow the evidence gently, letting the evening unfold naturally. And in that measured patience, the audience, too, could feel the thrill of discovery and the quiet suspense of a puzzle waiting to be solved just beneath the warmth of the festive hall. Chapter 3. Secrets Under the Mistletoe. As the evening settled into a softer rhythm, the clamour of initial panic had faded into quiet conversation. Miss Marple moved gently among the villagers, her presence unobtrusive yet attentive. She paired herself with those who appeared most willing to speak, leaning slightly forward and listening with the careful patience that had earned her the village's quiet respect. The warmth of the hall, with its flickering candles and the faint scent of pine, created an atmosphere conducive to honesty, and slowly voices lowered into murmured confidences. Mrs. Penworthy, still holding a teacup that had grown cold, whispered about a small mistake in the wreath arrangement. Though it seemed trivial, Miss Marple noted the pride in her tone, the slight defensiveness beneath her soft words. "I must admit," she murmured, "I may have placed the berries too close together on the central display. It won't ruin the hall, of course, but I feel it could have been done differently." The admission, innocuous as it was, revealed the careful attention with which villagers approached even minor details, and it offered insight into the personalities that might influence more serious actions. Nearby, Mr. Lambert, still recovering from his collapse, spoke quietly to Miss Marple about a long-forgotten disagreement he had once had with a fellow club member. It had seemed minor at the time, over a misplaced watering can, but the memory surfaced now, carried by the tension of the evening. "It was nothing at all," he insisted, though the way his eyes flicked toward the young woman arranging the poinsettias suggested otherwise. Miss Marple catalogued the subtle hints of lingering resentment, aware that old rivalries often found expression in the most unexpected circumstances. Even the youngest members contributed softly to the unfolding narrative. A pair of girls, whispering behind a small display of mistletoe, admitted to minor pranks, switching labels on plants or hiding a misplaced ornament. Their laughter was quiet and fleeting, yet it revealed a village full of small secrets, mischiefs, and moments of innocent deception. Miss Marple smiled inwardly. The accumulation of such details, while harmless individually, helped her form a fuller picture of how personalities and petty rivalries might intersect with more serious events. A middle-aged man, normally reserved, spoke in a low voice about his unease over certain holiday preparations.
"I don't usually mind," he admitted, "but this year it feels different."
The decorations seem almost too perfect, as though someone is watching for a mistake. Miss Marple noted his anxiety but recognized it as part of the village's collective tension rather than an immediate threat. Still, his words hinted at heightened awareness, a subtle undercurrent that could interact with deeper motives. Throughout these whispered conversations, Miss Marple maintained a gentle, unhurried presence. She did not press for confessions about the collapse, nor did she reveal the thoughts forming in her mind. Instead, she allowed each villager to speak at their own pace, drawing out small truths while creating an environment of calm curiosity. In this way, the atmosphere remained warm, cozy, and intimate, even as layers of potential intrigue quietly unfolded beneath the surface. By the time Miss Marple stepped back, she had gathered a tapestry of minor confessions, innocent rivalries, hidden anxieties, playful mischiefs, and subtle resentments. Individually, they might have seemed inconsequential, yet, together, they formed a nuanced understanding of the village's social landscape. Each revelation, each whispered word, hinted at connections that might prove relevant to the evening's mystery. In the quiet hum of conversation, the audience could sense the gentle tension building, a rhythm both soothing and suspenseful, leading them ever deeper into the story while keeping the warmth of the Christmas gathering intact. Miss Marple's eyes drifted across the holly and pine of the central wreath, carefully inspecting each twist of ribbon and cluster of berries. Something caught her attention, a small piece of paper tucked discreetly behind a sprig of ivy, almost invisible to anyone glancing casually. With gentle hands, she extracted it, unfolding the delicate note to reveal a few hastily written lines. The ink was smudged in places as though written in a hurry or by trembling fingers, and the words themselves were cryptic. "Old grudges never die. What is buried will always resurface. Trust only the green and red." The phrasing was peculiar, its tone equal parts warning and reflection. Miss Marple's mind began to trace the implications. Who among the villagers had reason to write such a message? The reference to old grudges suggested history, perhaps lingering resentment tied to forgotten disputes, while the vague advice about trust hinted at secrecy and selective alliances. Even the mention of colours, the very shades of the festive decoration surrounding the note, seemed deliberate, a subtle connection to the setting itself. It was a puzzle wrapped in an everyday object, charmingly innocent, yet undeniably unsettling. She looked up from the note, scanning the room with her usual quiet attention. The villagers were arranging refreshments, adjusting garlands, and speaking in subdued tones, unaware that a message of intrigue had already been discovered. Miss Marple considered the possibilities. Perhaps the note was meant for someone in particular, or perhaps it had been misplaced and left inadvertently. Whoever had written it, she thought, was aware of the small web of rivalries and tensions that threaded through the club, and they had chosen this moment to draw attention, if only discreetly, to truths that had long remained hidden. Her gaze fell on Mrs. Faraday, who was adjusting the placement of holly berries with meticulous care. The expression on her face was serene, yet Miss Marple wondered if the note might speak indirectly to her, or to someone she had once competed with. Nearby, the latecomer lingered, seemingly observing the room, but careful not to reveal their interest. Miss Marple could sense the faint tremor of uncertainty in their stance, though she made no immediate judgment. Every gesture, every sidelong glance was catalogued quietly, as part of a mental tapestry of the evening's small yet significant events. The cryptic note introduced a new layer of intrigue, subtle yet potent. Its words were not an accusation, but a suggestion, a whisper of hidden motives, past grievances, and the possibility that what appeared to be a simple holiday gathering might conceal far more than anyone suspected. Miss Marple tucked it carefully into her handkerchief, her mind already weaving possibilities, considering who might have had cause to write such a message and how it could tie into the subtle tensions she had observed earlier. Even as the villagers continued their gentle preparations, the presence of the note left a faint chill beneath the cosy warmth of the hall. Miss Marple could feel the shift, a subtle unease threading through the decorations and conversation, like a shadow beneath the twinkling lights. Something was quietly stirring beneath the festive surface, and she knew that step by careful step, the evening's mysteries were beginning to unfold. Chapter 4. The Frosted Trail. The night had deepened, and the soft snow continued to drift lazily from the sky, coating the village in a quiet, shimmering blanket. Miss Marple stepped carefully outside the hall, her boots crunching softly against the powdery surface. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of pine and the distant smoke of chimneys, but her attention was immediately drawn to the pattern left upon the snow. Footprints, uneven and hurried, led from the hall's side door toward the small garden shed at the far edge of the yard. She knelt gently beside the tracks, examining each impression with a practiced eye. The steps were erratic, some deep as though the person had paused or slipped, others light and hurried, suggesting a deliberate attempt to reach the shed quickly without drawing attention. Tiny flecks of mud dotted the edges of the boots, smudging the pristine white snow, and broken twigs littered the path, evidence of a hurried passage through the underbrush. Each detail told a story, and Miss Marple's mind began piecing together the narrative without haste, quietly reconstructing the movements of the unknown visitor. The footprints widened slightly at one point, indicating a momentary pause, perhaps to peer through a window or consider an action. Miss Marple traced the subtle impressions with her gloved finger, noting the direction of weight, the angle of turns, and the occasional drag that suggested carelessness, or perhaps distraction. The crisp air amplified the faint sounds of the village at night, distant church bells, the occasional hoot of an owl, and the soft whisper of snow brushing against branches. Yet the serenity of the winter night could not mask the urgency embedded in each track, a subtle tension that made the frozen garden feel charged with invisible energy. As she followed the trail, Miss Marple's attention shifted to the shed itself. The door, slightly ajar, bore marks along its frame, faint scratches that suggested recent disturbance. The snow around its base had been brushed aside, though imperfectly, revealing scuffed footprints leading both toward and away from the building. There was a rhythm to the scene, a quiet narrative hidden in the smallest details, the direction of a step, the angle of a boot, the disturbance of a twig or stone. Each clue, though modest, hinted at a story of haste, secrecy, and something meant to remain concealed. Miss Marple straightened and surveyed the yard, her eyes scanning for further hints. Could someone have entered or exited unseen? Were these tracks the work of a single person, or might another presence have gone unnoticed in the dark? The questions multiplied silently, and though the night was cold, her mind was warm with curiosity, methodically examining every possibility. The snow, so calm and inviting at first glance, had become a canvas of mystery, each footprint a carefully placed mark leading to unknown intentions. For a moment, she allowed herself to linger in the quiet beauty of the garden. the twinkling lights from the hall spilling softly onto the snow, contrasting the serenity of the scene with the subtle tension beneath. The footprints, the broken twigs, and the traces of mud spoke to secrets moving under the cover of night, secrets that only careful observation could uncover. Miss Marple inhaled the crisp air, her thoughts already threading together the scene, aware that within these silent tracks lay answers waiting to be discovered. Miss Marple pushed the shed door open with a soft creak, letting the faint glow from her lantern spill across the cluttered interior. The space was small but packed with gardening tools, crates of bulbs, and remnants of past seasonal displays. Shadows danced along the wooden walls, flickering across rakes and trowels, while the faint smell of damp earth mingled with the crisp winter air that had followed her in. Each object seemed ordinary, yet Miss Marple's sharp eyes scanned everything for irregularities, knowing that even the smallest detail could conceal a secret. A crate of pine cones near the corner caught her attention first. It had been disturbed, one lid slightly askew as though recently handled. Nearby, a pair of gloves lay on the floor, dusted with dirt and traces of frost. Miss Marple noted their placement, wondering who might have left them and whether their owner had meant to return. Then her gaze fell on the ornament, a small, delicate star once intended for the hall's central Christmas tree. Its absence had been noted earlier by the villagers, and now, tucked under a pile of straw in the shed, it seemed deliberately hidden. The ornament, simple yet gleaming faintly in the lantern light, carried a weight far beyond its size. It was a symbol of pride, achievement, and perhaps resentment. Miss Marple's attention shifted to the subtle signs of past activity. Marks on the floorboards indicated frequent movement, some smoothed by repeated footsteps, others fresh and sharp. A broken handle on a rake hinted at frustration or carelessness, a clue that perhaps someone had entered in haste or with nervous intent. She observed the edges of crates, noting faint smudges where fingerprints had pressed against the wood, telling silent stories of hands that had grasped, moved, or searched for something specific. Each trace seemed mundane, yet Miss Marple understood that even the smallest disturbance in a familiar space could be charged with meaning. As she examined the shed, her thoughts returned to the villagers. Old rivalries had always simmered beneath the surface of the garden club's cheerful exterior. She remembered hushed arguments over flower arrangements, whispered complaints about past competitions, and the subtle pride that often flared when someone's work was praised or overlooked. The missing ornament, once an innocuous decoration, now took on new significance. Could it represent the culmination of a grudge, a tangible token of jealousy, or a spark for more serious mischief? Miss Marple catalogued each possibility without hurry, letting the evidence speak for itself while maintaining her calm.
Unassuming demeanor, the shed itself seemed to exhale a quiet tension.
The contrast between its humble charm and the significance of its contents strikingly clear. Every item, every trace of dirt or displaced object added to the narrative, a story of pride, rivalry, and subtle competition intertwined with the larger mystery of the evening. Miss Marple carefully replaced the ornament in a safer spot, her mind tracing the invisible connections between past grievances and present actions. There was no need for panic. The scene spoke softly, yet insistently, if one had the patience to listen. Outside, the village lay under its blanket of snow, peaceful and bright in the lantern light. Inside the shed, however, the quiet revealed an undercurrent of tension and intent, a reminder that even in the coziest of settings, human emotions could stir like a hidden current beneath a still surface. Miss Marple studied each detail, every mark and misplacement, understanding that the smallest evidence often carried the largest truths. The missing ornament, the disturbed crates, and the faint traces of hands and footprints formed pieces of a puzzle waiting to be assembled. And as she stepped back into the crisp night air, she knew that the secrets of the garden club were only the beginning, each revelation gently pulling her, and the audience, deeper into the unfolding mystery. Chapter 5. Red Herrings and Holly Berries. The village hall seemed calm again, but Miss Marple could sense the quiet tension that lingered beneath the surface, like frost clinging to the edges of a window pane. She moved among the villagers with her usual gentle curiosity, observing without overt intrusion, her sharp eyes noting every detail. Something felt off, subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was enough to make her mind alert to potential misdirection. Near the entrance, a scarf lay draped over a chair, its vibrant red hue startling against the muted tones of coats and lantern light. At first glance it seemed simply forgotten, but Miss Marple's experience told her that even small, misplaced items could carry significance. Whose scarf was it, and why had it been left so conspicuously? The question stirred her curiosity, though she made no immediate assumptions, filing the detail quietly in her mind for later comparison. A shadow flickered across the far wall, elongated by the gentle glow of candlelight. Miss Marple paused, following its movement, but found only Mr. Travers adjusting the garland along the mantelpiece. The effect was fleeting yet disorienting, a reminder that in the midst of confusion, even ordinary motions could appear suspicious. The mind, she reflected, often exaggerated what it did not fully understand, and she made a mental note to separate perception from fact as she continued her observations. Conflicting stories began to emerge from villagers speaking in hushed tones. Mrs. Penworthy insisted she had been arranging pastries near the table when the collapse occurred, while another account suggested she had been near the wreath display just moments before. A small discrepancy, almost trivial, yet it hinted at either imperfect recollection or intentional diversion. Miss Marple noted the subtle tensions in voices and gestures, the hesitation before answering, the way eyes flicked to others in the room, the fleeting tightening of lips. Each small misdirection was a piece of its own puzzle, challenging her to discern truth from distraction. Even the latecomer's arrival added to the labyrinth of clues. They moved with quiet confidence, yet their glance lingered on certain decorations longer than necessary, and Miss Marple caught a faint tremor in their hand as they adjusted a ribbon. It could mean nothing, or it could indicate concealed awareness of some detail they preferred others not to notice. In a room where every gesture mattered, even the smallest movement became part of the unfolding mystery. Miss Marple stepped back and surveyed the hall once more. Red herrings lay scattered like hidden berries among the holly, a scarf suggesting presence, a shadow implying concealment, contradictory stories painting confusion. Each detail tested her ability to focus on what truly mattered, separating accident from intent, distraction from truth. She catalogued everything mentally, aware that genuine clues often hid in plain sight, while misdirection could lure even the most attentive observer away from the heart of the matter. In the warm glow of the hall, with its comforting decorations and soft murmurs of conversation, the contrast between cozy charm and subtle deceit became striking. Miss Marple's calm demeanour allowed her to navigate these small traps thoughtfully, teasing out what held significance from what merely distracted. The evening's mystery, she understood, depended as much on perception as on observation, and as she moved quietly through the room, the audience too was drawn into the careful unravelling, encouraged to consider which hints were genuine and which had been planted to mislead. The gentle warmth of the hall had begun to feel fragile, as if the very air were charged with the unsettled energy of whispers and sideways glances. Miss Marple remained near the central table, observing the subtle shifts in posture, the slight tremor of hands, and the hurried movements of those who felt the need to be elsewhere. The initial shock of the collapse and the discovery of cryptic clues had evolved into a soft but persistent tension, a current that pulled at the edges of conversation and polite laughter. Gossip began to ripple through the room like a slow,
widening wave. Mrs. Faraday whispered anxiously to a neighbor about who might have written the cryptic note, her words lightly tinged with suspicion.
Others, once composed, now muttered about footprints in the snow and misplaced ornaments, their eyes darting toward the latecomer and each other in quick, nervous motions. The village, accustomed to civility and routine, seemed suddenly caught in the exhilarating unease that accompanies uncertainty. Miss Marple, however, remained an anchor, her calm presence steadying the atmosphere even as murmurs escalated. Some villagers panicked, voices rising in a careful crescendo of alarm. Who could have done such a thing? A younger member asked, clutching her shawl tightly.
It must have been deliberate.
Others became defensive, offering explanations or alibis with almost frantic earnestness. Mr. Travers, the treasurer, adjusted his spectacles repeatedly, trying to maintain composure while subtly directing attention away from inconsistencies in his own account. Miss Marple observed the micro-expressions of fear, irritation, and defensiveness, quietly cataloguing the small cues that revealed character under pressure. Even the latecomer appeared affected by the rising tension, though they attempted to maintain composure. A frown passed quickly across their face as they noticed the faint shift in focus, the subtle suspicion directed toward those present. Miss Marple's sharp eyes caught every nuance, the slight tightening of a jaw, a quick glance toward a particular decoration, the tiny hesitation before speaking. Each moment, each pause told her as much about intent and emotion as any spoken word, and she made careful note of the undercurrents shaping the evening. Meanwhile, the scent of pine and faint peppermint mingled with the low hum of nervous voices, creating an almost surreal juxtaposition, the familiar warmth of the festive gathering set against the electric tension of suspicion and fear. Even the carefully arranged holly seemed to take on a new significance, as villagers occasionally brushed against it with subtle gestures of anxiety or caution. The hall, with its cozy glow, had become a stage for human emotion, its small conflicts magnified by the intimacy of the space. Miss Marple allowed herself to move gently among the groups, asking soft questions and listening with patience. Each hesitant answer, each fleeting admission added a thread to the growing tapestry of understanding. Some confessions were trivial, others suggested hidden grievances or past rivalries. The puzzle pieces were coming together slowly, each new revelation illuminating relationships and motives that were not immediately obvious. The calm, unhurried way she engaged encouraged others to speak, often revealing more than they realized. By the time the candles had burned lower and the murmur of voices settled into a quieter rhythm, the hall's tension had not vanished, but it had become organized, almost purposeful. Miss Marple, ever patient, had begun to untangle the threads of truth from the web of gossip and fear. The villagers, now aware of the underlying currents, were left with a sense of anticipation, a feeling that the resolution of the evening's mysteries was approaching. In the delicate balance of comfort and suspense, the audience too was drawn deeper, held by the steady yet observant presence of a woman who could see far more than she let on. Chapter 6. Snowflakes and Suspicion. The hall, though still glowing with warm candlelight, carried an undercurrent of careful observation. Miss Marple moved slowly among the clusters of villagers.
Noting more than their words, she watched the subtle shifts in posture,
the brief exchange of glances and the unspoken signals that passed between certain pairs. Alliances were forming, delicate and almost imperceptible, yet the seasoned observer could detect the quiet choreography of secret understanding. Near the refreshment table, Mrs. Penworthy and the latecomer exchanged smiles that seemed unusually intimate for casual acquaintances. Their voices were low, almost conspiratorial, and Miss Marple's eyes followed the way their hands lingered over shared ornaments, adjusting ribbons or straightening holly, their movements synchronized with subtle ease. There was no overt malice, yet the pairing suggested a private understanding, a quiet coordination that was not immediately apparent to the others in the room. The potential for hidden agendas, Miss Marple noted, could be concealed behind such courteous familiarity. Across the hall, a younger club member, flushed with nervous energy, appeared to shadow Mrs. Faraday, offering suggestions or commenting softly on the placement of decorations. Miss Marple observed how the older woman tolerated these interjections, nodding politely, yet never fully relinquishing control. The dynamic hinted at a blend of mentorship, rivalry, and perhaps subtle manipulation, the lines blurred in the warmth of shared purpose, but carrying an edge of tension beneath the surface. Every subtle nod, glance, and gesture contributed to a map of alliances and quiet rivalries that might otherwise go unnoticed. Even Mr. Travers, normally measured and composed, seemed drawn into an unspoken coalition with a pair of villagers near the holly display. Their coordinated movements, adjusting ornaments, exchanging brief comments, and subtly monitoring the rest of the room, spoke of a shared interest or mutual understanding. Miss Marple catalogued each nuance carefully, aware that human behavior often concealed more than it revealed. She reflected on the ways hidden motives could masquerade as friendliness, the way subtle collaboration might be invisible to all but the most attentive observer. The gentle hum of conversation and the soft rustle of coats created a comforting backdrop, yet the air was thick with quiet strategy. Miss Marple noticed the smallest gestures, a fleeting frown quickly replaced by a smile, a hand lingering near another's elbow, a whispered comment that seemed inconsequential but carried layered meaning. Each instance suggested that even amidst the cozy setting of candles, holly, and snowflakes visible through the windows, human nature remained intriguingly complex, capable of concealing jealousy, ambition, and sometimes more sinister intent beneath a veneer of politeness. As she stepped back and observed the room from the doorway, Miss Marple's mind worked steadily, threading these subtle alliances into the broader picture of the evening. The warmth of the hall and the cheerful decorations contrasted with the quiet intricacies of social maneuvering, making the mystery all the more compelling. The audience, too, could sense the delicate interplay, drawn in by the tension that lurked behind friendly faces and shared laughter, understanding that in the midst of holiday cheer, secrets could flourish, and the truth often waited patiently, hidden in plain sight. Miss Marple returned to a quiet corner of the hall, her hands folded over her notebook as she surveyed the scene with the calm patience of one who had long learned that observation was often more revealing than questions. The warmth of the hall contrasted with the chill outside, yet the sense of anticipation was tangible, almost like the pause before the first notes of a familiar carol. It was in these quiet moments that she could truly begin piecing together the threads of the evening's events. She reviewed the subtle inconsistencies she had observed earlier, the slightly erratic footprints leading to the shed, the missing ornament, the cryptic note tucked in the holly wreath, and the fleeting gestures exchanged between villagers. Each clue carried its own weight, yet none spoke conclusively on its own. Only by weaving them together into a coherent timeline could the truth begin to emerge. Miss Marple's mind worked methodically, lining up moments, recalling glances, and tracing movements from the collapse near the holly display to the whispers of secret confessions. The latecomer's past connection to Mr. Lambert resurfaced as a focal point in her deductions. Though outwardly polite, their eyes had betrayed subtle recognition when the collapse occurred, a silent acknowledgement that hinted at unresolved grievances. Miss Marple considered the possibilities carefully. Was this merely a coincidental presence, or had prior tensions contributed to the night's chaos? She balanced these reflections against other villagers' behaviors, noting those who had displayed minor jealousy or defensiveness, who had lingered near the displays, or who had seemed unusually eager to redirect attention. She examined the timeline of small actions: the toppled chair, the scuff marks near the wreath, the hastily hidden ornament in the shed. Each piece of evidence suggested a moment of decision, a choice made under the cover of ordinary holiday activity. Miss Marple could almost hear the silent deliberation behind each gesture, the quick glance to see who was watching. The careful movement to conceal or reveal, the subtle alteration of a story to suit immediate needs. These were not dramatic acts of malice, but tiny decisions accumulated to form the larger mystery. As she reviewed alibis, minor contradictions began to take shape. A villager who had claimed to be arranging pastries had been glimpsed near the wreath moments before the collapse. Another, who insisted they had remained by the decorations, showed traces of fresh mud on boots, matching the footprints that had led to the shed. Each revelation was a small spark, illuminating corners of the evening previously shrouded in ambiguity. Miss Marple catalogued each detail with quiet precision, aware that the truth often lay in the spaces between statements and actions, rather than in the statements themselves. By now, she began to perceive patterns emerging. Connections between rivalries, alliances, and past grievances formed a web that spanned the hall. Minor confessions now hinted at possible motives, the cryptic note suggested awareness of old grudges, and the scattered physical evidence confirmed movement and intent. The evening's seemingly random events were no longer isolated. Instead, they converged into a coherent sequence that, when fully understood, could reveal both the culprit and the nature of their plan. Miss Marple paused, letting the moment of reflection settle. The cosy glow of the hall, the soft murmur of conversation, and the faint scent of pine and peppermint all remained, yet beneath them lay the steady pulse of revelation. The audience, gently guided by her meticulous observation, could begin to trace the hidden pathways themselves, weighing possibilities, testing assumptions, and forming their own theories. Each small clue was a step along the path, every observation a key to unlocking the pattern that had remained elusive. With patience and clarity, she folded her notes and allowed herself a quiet smile. The threads were coming together, the picture becoming sharper, and the quiet excitement of discovery pulsed through the room like the subtle rhythm of a ticking clock. In the warmth of the festive hall, listeners could feel the thrill of deduction alongside Miss Marple, knowing that the final pieces of the puzzle were just within reach, ready to illuminate the mystery that had held the village and the audience entranced. Chapter 7. The Christmas Eve Revelation. The hall glowed softly under the flickering light of candles, their reflections dancing across polished wooden floors and glimmering ornaments. Miss Marple invited the villagers to gather in a loose circle near the central hearth, the warmth of the fire mingling with the scent of pine and a faint hint of peppermint. The arrangement was deliberate, comfortable enough to feel reassuring, yet intimate enough for attention to linger on each person. A soft hush fell as she cleared her throat and began to speak, her calm voice guiding the room with measured precision. "My friends," she said, "tonight has been unusual, even by our village standards. Yet in every unusual event, there are small details, subtle movements, inconsistencies in stories,
and overlooked signs that tell us more than words alone." She paused,
letting the murmurs settle, the villagers adjusting in their seats, eyes flicking nervously toward one another. Each person was aware of the gentle authority in her tone, the way her words carried observation without accusation. She began recounting the evening's events carefully, emphasizing observations rather than conclusions. She mentioned the toppled chair near the holly display, the footprints in the snow leading to the garden shed, and the cryptic note tucked in the wreath. Each fact was presented without judgment, yet her calm delivery magnified their significance. Miss Marple allowed space between points, giving villagers the opportunity to react subtly, revealing small gestures that might betray nervousness, discomfort, or curiosity. "Some of you were near the wreath when Mr. Lambert collapsed," she continued, "and while everyone appeared concerned, there were slight inconsistencies in recollections. These are natural under pressure, yet they offer insight into movement and timing." Her eyes swept the room with quiet precision, taking note of who shifted in their chair, who avoided eye contact, and who fidgeted with hands or scarves. Each reaction was catalogued in her mind, part of the careful assembly of evidence that had been accumulating since the evening began. Miss Marple then drew attention to the shed and the small disturbances within, the misplaced ornament, the disturbed crates, and the traces of mud and broken twigs. "Even in spaces we consider familiar," she said softly, "small changes reveal more than they conceal. What might seem trivial can illuminate intent, movement, and attention." Her words encouraged the villagers to reflect on their own observations, fostering a shared awareness while gently heightening the tension without panic. She invited soft recollections from the group, encouraging each villager to speak briefly about their movements and actions. The sharing was deliberate and unhurried, creating a rhythm of calm introspection punctuated by small revelations. Some offered minor admissions, a hand lingering on a decoration, a glance toward another villager that Miss Marple noted carefully. Others hesitated, a nervous clearing of the throat or a subtle frown suggesting unease, while a few maintained composure, concealing any sign of involvement. By the time she concluded her careful recounting, the room held a charged stillness balanced between comfort and anticipation. The familiar warmth of the hall, the soft flicker of candlelight, and the gentle glow of the fire created an environment that soothed even as curiosity sharpened. Listeners could imagine the tension subtly building in a cozy setting, feeling both the thrill of suspense and the reassuring presence of Miss Marple guiding the process. In this way, every detail, every small reaction, and every hesitant word became part of the evening's unfolding narrative. Through her calm and meticulous review, Miss Marple transformed ordinary observations into a mosaic of insight, drawing villagers and the audience closer to the heart of the mystery. While maintaining the comforting rhythms of a holiday gathering, the stage was set for the final revelations, and the first threads of truth had begun to weave themselves into a coherent whole, promising answers while preserving the cozy ambience of a Christmas Eve like no other. The warmth of the hall wrapped around the gathered villagers like a soft blanket, but Miss Marple's keen eyes did not miss a single detail. Her attention lingered on the small decorations, the ornaments glinting under the candlelight, and the subtle shifts of posture as villagers exchanged glances. Among the familiar holiday trappings, a single irregularity drew her notice, a star-shaped ornament, slightly out of place on the side table, its angle askew as though disturbed but quickly repositioned. The movement was subtle, almost imperceptible, yet it whispered a story that had eluded the others. Miss Marple's gaze softened as she reached toward it, turning the ornament slowly in her hands. Beneath its painted surface, faint scratches suggested it had been handled recently, with care but also with a deliberate urgency. A small note, partially folded and tucked behind the star, peeked from beneath the rim. She extracted it carefully, revealing a half-finished letter, its script hesitant and uneven, as if the writer had been interrupted or had reconsidered mid-sentence. The words were fragmentary yet meaningful. "I thought it would be enough."
"They will never understand. I only wanted—"
The villagers watched silently as Miss Marple examined the note. Her fingers traced the lines gently and she looked up, her eyes meeting theirs with quiet clarity. It was not accusation, but illumination, an invitation to consider the implications of this otherwise overlooked evidence. She began to speak, her tone soft but deliberate, guiding attention without haste. "Sometimes," she said, "the smallest detail carries the greatest weight. A misplaced ornament, a momentary lapse, or a half-finished thought can reveal more than a confession spoken aloud." She walked slowly around the circle, allowing her words to settle, then began connecting the threads. The note, coupled with the slight disturbance of the star ornament, indicated intent and urgency, a silent signal of someone acting under pressure. It aligned with the cryptic note tucked in the holly wreath and the footprints in the snow, forming a pattern that had been invisible until these subtle elements were viewed together. Miss Marple's voice drew attention not to blame, but to understanding, encouraging each villager to recognize how small actions could hold significant meaning. The latecomer shifted slightly, a barely perceptible tightening of hands, while Mr. Travers adjusted his spectacles, lips pressed in quiet thought. Villagers exchanged glances, the tension balanced by a growing realization that the picture was beginning to clarify. Miss Marple's calm manner reassured them even as the mystery approached its peak. The puzzle pieces were aligning, and the quiet observations they had once overlooked now converged into a coherent pattern. She continued with deliberate care, recounting connections between past grievances, subtle rivalries, and recent movements. Each revelation was gentle, layered with context, allowing the audience to appreciate the unfolding clarity without feeling rushed or alarmed. The half-finished letter, once dismissed as inconsequential, became the key to understanding intent. Its incomplete sentences, combined with small physical cues, the tilt of the ornament, the faint smudge on its surface, illuminated the motives that had remained hidden beneath the cheerful veneer of the evening. By the time Miss Marple set the ornament back in its proper place, the room was filled with a quiet, reflective stillness. The mystery had reached a soft yet suspenseful peak. The audience could sense the culmination of careful observation, subtle intuition, and patient deduction. The village, its warmth and charm intact, now stood on the edge of revelation, poised between curiosity and comfort. Every listener, guided gently by Miss Marple's insight, understood that the smallest, quietest clue could speak volumes, and that the holiday's peace depended on seeing what had been there all along. Chapter 8. Resolution by the Hearth. The hall was quiet now, the soft glow of the fire reflecting on the polished wooden floors and the glimmering ornaments. Miss Marple stood near the hearth, her hands folded calmly in front of her. Around her the villagers waited in tentative silence, a mixture of curiosity and apprehension in their expressions. Even the soft murmur of the wind outside seemed to pause, as if the village itself leaned forward to hear what she had to say. "My friends," she began, her voice gentle yet authoritative, "tonight has taught us that even in the coziest of settings, human motives can be complicated, subtle, and sometimes unexpected. What appeared to be ordinary actions, the misplaced ornament, the hurried footsteps, the cryptic notes, have been part of a carefully concealed story." She allowed a brief pause, letting the weight of her words settle among the villagers. Slowly, she recounted the evidence, tracing the trail of observations that had built over the evening. The footprints leading to the shed, the half-finished letter tucked behind the star ornament, the cryptic note in the holly wreath, all these small details were not isolated incidents, but pieces of a single, coherent puzzle. Miss Marple's calm tone carried a quiet insistence, inviting the villagers to see the connections for themselves while preserving the warmth of the festive gathering. Then she looked toward the latecomer, her gaze steady yet kind. "It was you," she said softly, "who, driven by a mixture of pride, fear, and unresolved grievances, sought to hide what had occurred. The ornament, meant as a symbol of past achievement, became the catalyst for a moment of panic, and your actions afterward, though intended to conceal, left traces too small to escape careful observation." The room remained silent, every eye fixed on the accused, who now lowered their gaze in quiet acknowledgment. Miss Marple continued, describing the motives and reasoning with clarity, showing how each choice, each hurried movement and whispered exchange had been logical from the culprit's perspective, yet revealed through the subtle inconsistencies that only a careful observer could notice. The villagers listened, some with surprise, others with relief, as the tangled threads of mystery were gently untangled before them. The solution was elegant, satisfying, and yet entirely plausible, leaving no lingering doubts about the accuracy of her deductions. As she concluded, the tension in the room dissolved like morning frost under sunlight. A collective exhale seemed to ripple through the villagers, smiles slowly returning to faces that had been tense with suspicion. The warmth of the hall, the scent of pine and peppermint, and the gentle glow of candles and the fire restored the Christmas spirit fully. Miss Marple's serene presence ensured that the resolution felt comforting, as though the village had simply returned to its rightful rhythm after a brief disruption. In the quiet that followed, the villagers exchanged glances, some offering hesitant congratulations, others nodding in acknowledgement of her insight. The cosy charm of the evening remained intact, now enriched by the satisfaction of truth revealed and justice quietly served. Miss Marple's calm, patient approach had allowed the mystery to unfold with grace, ensuring that both the culprit and the community found their place in the gentle restoration of harmony. The hall seemed to breathe again, a gentle warmth settling over every corner as villagers began to relax. Candles flickered softly on tables, reflecting off ornaments that sparkled like tiny stars, and the faint scent of pine mingled with the aroma of freshly brewed tea. Outside, the snow lay thick and pristine, glinting in the soft glow of lanterns and the faint moonlight, giving the village an almost magical stillness that contrasted perfectly with the earlier tension. Miss Marple moved among the villagers with her characteristic calm, exchanging soft words and small smiles. Minor grievances that had surfaced during the evening, the debates over decorations, the fleeting irritations, the subtle rivalries, were now quietly forgiven or set aside. Mrs. Penworthy offered a tentative nod to her neighbour, who responded with a gentle smile, the small gesture conveying more than words ever could. The latecomer, now at ease under Miss Marple's steady guidance, accepted warm greetings, and the air of suspicion softened into mutual understanding. In a corner by the fire, a teapot steamed gently on a tray, surrounded by cups and saucers. Miss Marple settled into a high-backed chair, the knitted throw over her lap adding to the cosy ambience. The clinking of spoons and the soft murmur of conversation created a comforting rhythm, a lull in the evening that allowed the village to absorb the sense of restored harmony. Even the ornaments, once symbols of hidden tension, now seemed to shine with cheerful approval, each glittering surface reflecting the soft light and the collective sigh of relief. Outside, snowflakes drifted lazily, their gentle fall mirrored in the glimmering patterns along frosted window panes. Villagers occasionally glanced through the glass, admiring the serene landscape, and it seemed as if nature itself had conspired to underline the evening's peaceful conclusion. The earlier mysteries and misdirections, once so pressing and urgent, were now softened into memory, lessons quietly absorbed, the importance of careful observation, the weight of small actions, and the subtle ways in which understanding and empathy could restore balance. Miss Marple sipped her tea, savouring the warmth that spread slowly through her hands and chest. She reflected on human nature with quiet amusement and gentle insight. Even in a village as familiar as this one, pride, rivalry, and misunderstanding could stir unrest, but equally, forgiveness, curiosity, and kindness could restore it. Every villager had contributed, knowingly or not, to the resolution, and the sense of shared experience reinforced bonds that were stronger for having weathered the brief storm. As the fire crackled and the soft glow of candlelight danced across smiling faces, the village embraced its peaceful rhythm once more. Laughter returned in quiet bursts, stories of minor mishaps were shared with humor, and the feeling of togetherness settled like a warm blanket over every heart. Listeners, drawn into the gentle cadence of the evening, could sense the lessons lingering, careful attention, patience, and the quiet power of goodwill. The Christmas decorations sparkled, the snow glistened outside, and Miss Marple's calm presence tied the final threads of the story together, leaving the village and the audience in a state of tranquil contentment, ready to rest with the comfort of mystery solved and harmony restored.